My son's voice cracked through the phone like a gunshot. "Dad, tell me Nadia's sitting right next to you. Tell me I'm losing my mind." I set down my pen. The afternoon light was filtering through the study windows, casting long amber rectangles across the oak desk, where I'd been reviewing old faculty correspondence. Outside, the maples along Willard Street had turned the color of rust and flame, a perfect October afternoon in Burlington, Vermont. The kind of day where nothing bad is supposed to happen. "She's here," I said. Reading on the couch. Silence. Then Ethan's breathing, rapid and shallow, like a man trying to hold himself together at the seams. Then who did I just watch check in for a flight to Zurich? With another man using a passport that doesn't have our last name. In the living room, Nadia turned a page and smiled at me through the open doorway. My blood turned to ice. "I'm incredibly grateful you're here. Quick question. How did you find this channel? YouTube recommendations or a friend's share? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Just a heads up, this story includes fictionalized elements for educational and entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or places is coincidental. But the protective lessons I'm sharing, those could genuinely help you safeguard your loved ones. My name is Arthur Brennan. I'm 64 years old, a retired mathematics professor who spent 40 years at the University of Vermont teaching cryptography and number theory. My colleagues used to joke that I could find a pattern in a pile of leaves. My wife Helen used to say it differently. "You see what others miss, Arthur. That's your gift. Don't ever stop looking." Helen passed away 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She fought it the way she did everything, with grace and stubbornness, and an absolute refusal to let anyone feel sorry for her. When she died, the house on Willard Street became a museum of her absence. Her herb garden still grew outside the kitchen window. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. And every morning, I still poured 2 cups of coffee before remembering I only needed 1. Ethan kept me going. My only son. 36 years old. A commercial pilot for JetBlue. Steady and disciplined in the cockpit. Hopelessly romantic everywhere else. When he met Nadia 4 years ago at an art exhibition downtown, he came home glowing like a man who'd just discovered fire. "She understands loss, Dad," he told me that night, standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine he'd barely touched. "She lost her parents when she was 14. She knows what it feels like to have the center of your world just disappear." I remember thinking, this is what Helen would have wanted. Someone to fill the quiet. Someone to make Ethan smile again, the way he used to before cancer stole his mother one Tuesday afternoon. They married 2 years later. Nadia moved into the house on Willard Street, and for the first time since Helen's death, the rooms felt lived in again. She tended Helen's herb garden. She learned to brew Turkish coffee in the copper sezve Helen had brought back from Istanbul. She called me Dad, and the word didn't feel forced. It felt like coming home. That was 2 years ago. I was wrong about everything. The call came on a Friday. I was reviewing old correspondence when my phone buzzed. Ethan's name on the screen. He was supposed to be at JFK, prepping for a transatlantic route. "Dad, is Nadia home right now?" His voice was wrong. Tight. Controlled the way pilots are trained to sound during emergencies. But underneath it, something was breaking. "She's in the living room," I said. Reading. "What's going on?" A pause. Behind him, I could hear the ambient noise of a terminal. Announcements echoing. The hum of rolling luggage on polished floors. "I'm at JFK. Gate B, 37. I just watched a woman who looks exactly like Nadia check in for a Swiss international flight to Zurich. Business class. She was with a man I don't recognize. Gray suit. Mid-40s. They were holding hands. And Dad, she used a different passport. A different name. My pulse shifted. "You're certain it was her?" "I'm trained to notice details, Dad. She was wearing the cashmere scarf I bought her for her birthday. The blue one, with the silver threading. And your wedding gift. Helen's pearl earrings. The teardrop set. I stood slowly. My knees protested. Across the hall, through the open study door, I could see the living room. Nadia sat on the sofa, legs tucked beneath her, a novel open on her lap. She wore a cream sweater and gray leggings. Her dark hair fell over one shoulder. She looked exactly like herself. Comfortable. Familiar. At peace. "Can you take a photo?" I asked quietly. "Already did." "Sending now." My phone vibrated. I opened the image. Gate area. Shot from a distance, but clear enough. A woman in a blue cashmere scarf and pearl teardrop earrings standing at the counter. Beside her, a man in a charcoal gray suit. His hand rested on the small of her back. She was laughing at something, her face turned slightly toward him. Nadia's face. Nadia's smile. Nadia's earrings that Helen had worn on our wedding day, 41 years ago. "Do you see it?" Ethan asked. "I see it." I looked back at the living room. Nadia glanced up from her book and met my eyes. She smiled, warm and easy, the way she always did. "Everything okay, Dad?" The words sounded right. It had sounded right for 2 years. But now, standing between a photograph of my daughter-in-law boarding a plane to Zurich and the woman sitting 10 feet away from me calling me Dad, the word felt like a lock I didn't have the key to. "Everything's fine," I said. She returned to her book. I walked back to my study and closed the door. My hands were not shaking. Not yet. 40 years of staring at equations until they confessed their secrets had taught me one thing. When the numbers don't add up, you don't panic. You don't guess. You look closer. I raised the phone to my ear. Ethan was still there, breathing hard. "Don't approach her," I said. "Don't let her know you're watching. When you land in Zurich, observe from a distance. See where she goes, who she meets. Then call me, Dad. If that's really Nadia on this plane, then who did I say good morning to on the phone 3 hours ago? Who's been sleeping in our guest room? Who's been watering Mom's garden?" I looked at the closed study door. Beyond it, the soft sound of a page turning, the creak of the sofa, the ordinary sounds of a woman who belonged here. "I don't know," I said. "But I'm going to find out." After I hung up, the house felt different. Not quieter. Quieter would have been a relief. It felt watched. It felt performed. Every sound from the living room, the rustle of pages, the soft pad of bare feet on hardwood, now carried a question mark. I sat at my desk and stared at the photograph on my phone. 2 women with the same face. One reading in my living room. One boarding a plane to Zurich, with a stranger's hand on her back. In 40 years of mathematics, I had learned to trust one thing above all else. When something is impossible, you are missing a variable. Somewhere between my living room and gate B37 at JFK, there was a variable I hadn't accounted for. And I was going to find it. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. Helen at 60, laughing in the garden, dirt on her knees, sunlight in her hair. She would have known what to do. She always did. But Helen was gone. And in her place, sitting on our sofa, reading a book and calling me Dad, was someone I was no longer sure I knew at all. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the old house settled around me, its familiar creaks and sighs now carrying a weight they had never carried before. Down the hall, behind the closed guest room door, someone was breathing, someone I had trusted, someone I had welcomed into my home, into my family, into the space Helen had left behind. At 2 a.m, I got up and walked to my study. The hallway was dark. A thin line of light glowed beneath the guest room door. She was still awake. I moved past it silently. The way you move past a room you are no longer sure is safe. In my study, I opened the laptop and pulled up the home security system. Helen had insisted we install it 3 years before she died. She was practical that way. "Promise me you'll keep this house safe, Arthur," she'd said, while the technician drilled into the doorframe. I'd told her she was being paranoid. She told me I was being naive. She was right. She usually was. The system stored 90 days of footage. 4 cameras. Front door, back door, kitchen, living room. I opened the front door feed and scrolled back 3 weeks to the Wednesday morning Nadia had left for what she'd called a translation conference in Montreal. Timestamp: 8:12 in the morning. The front door opened. Nadia stepped out. She wore a black wool coat and pulled a red rolling suitcase behind her. Her hair was pinned up. She locked the door, walked down the porch steps, and climbed into a dark sedan idling at the curb. The car pulled away. I watched the empty porch for a moment, the autumn wind scattering leaves across the steps. Then I kept the footage running. 8:21. Nothing. 8:30. A delivery truck passed. 8:40. A jogger. I almost stopped watching. 8:51. 39 minutes after Nadia left, the front door opened again. A woman stepped inside. Same height. Same build. Same dark hair falling over one shoulder. But she wore a gray cardigan instead of a black coat. No suitcase. And she moved differently. Nadia walked through this house the way you walk through your own skin, without thinking, without looking. This woman paused at the threshold. She stood in the entryway and looked around slowly, carefully, the way a person looks at a room they are entering for the first time. She moved into the kitchen first. I switched to the kitchen camera and watched her open cabinets one by one. She ran her fingers along the shelf where we kept the spices, pausing at the turmeric Helen had labeled by hand. She opened the refrigerator and studied its contents. She picked up the coffee canister, read the label, set it back down. She pulled open the drawer where we kept utensils and lifted each one as if memorizing weight and placement. Then she reached for the coffee mugs. There were 6 on the shelf. She picked them up one at a time, turning them over, examining them. She stopped at the 5th one, a white ceramic mug with a chipped handle. Nadia's mug. The one she refused to throw away because Ethan had bought it for her at a farmer's market on their first date. She called it her lucky cup. This woman held it up to the light, studied the chip, then set it aside, separate from the others. She knew which mug mattered. She had been told, but she held it in her right hand. Nadia was left-handed. Every morning for 2 years, I had watched Nadia wrap her left hand around that chipped mug and cradle it against her chest while she waited for the coffee to cool. It was one of those details you absorb without knowing it. The way you memorize the rhythm of someone's footsteps or the sound of their laugh. This woman was right-handed. I kept watching. She moved through the living room, running her hand along the bookshelf, touching the spines the way a student touches artifacts in a museum. She paused at the framed photographs on the mantel. Helen and me on our wedding day. Ethan in his pilot's uniform. Nadia and Ethan at their reception, foreheads pressed together, laughing. She picked up the wedding photo and stared at it for a long time. Then she set it down and moved to the sofa. She sat where Nadia always sat, in the corner with the reading lamp, and she pulled her legs beneath her the way Nadia always did. She opened a book from the side table and held it in front of her face, practicing. She was practicing being Nadia in our living room. I sat back in my chair. The blue light of the screen painted the walls of my study. Outside, the wind pushed against the old windows. I rewound the footage and watched it again. 8:12. Nadia leaves. 8:51. Someone else arrives. 39 minutes. That was the window. 39 minutes. To replace a woman in her own home. I watched the arrival sequence a 3rd time, slower now. The way she paused at the door. The careful survey of each room. The deliberate way she chose the right mug, sat in the right spot, opened the right book. She had studied for this role. She had rehearsed. Someone had given her notes, photographs, instructions. Someone had mapped every detail of Nadia's daily life and handed it to this woman like a script. She had been living in my house for 3 weeks, eating at my table, sitting in my living room, calling me Dad, and I had not seen it. The old mathematician who prided himself on spotting anomalies had missed the biggest one of all, sitting 10 feet away from him every single morning. A sound pulled me back. Footsteps on the stairs. Soft, careful, coming down. I closed the laptop and turned off the desk lamp. The study went dark. My heart hammered against my ribs. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and moved toward the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open. The clink of a glass. Water, pouring. Then the footsteps came back, pausing in the hallway just outside my study door. A knock. Gentle. Dad? Can't sleep either? Her voice was warm. Concerned. Perfect. I kept my own voice steady. Just reviewing some old files. You know how I get with numbers. A soft laugh. Don't stay up too late. Good night, Dad. Good night. Her footsteps faded up the stairs. The guest room door clicked shut. I sat in the dark, listening to the silence. And I thought about what I had just seen on that screen. The woman who had just called me Dad, who had just laughed at my joke about numbers, who had just wished me good night with the exact right amount of warmth, had spent her first hour in this house memorizing how to be someone else. She had studied the cabinets, the mugs, the photographs, the furniture. She had learned where to sit, which book to hold, which mug to reach for. She was not my daughter-in-law. She was an actress performing the role of my daughter-in-law, and she had been performing it for 21 days without a single person noticing. Until now. I opened the laptop again. The screen cast its cold blue glow across my desk. I pulled out my leather notebook, the one I'd carried through 40 years of lectures and research, and I opened it to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote 2 words. Day 1. Then beneath it, I began to write down everything I knew, everything I suspected, and everything I needed to find out. Because in 40 years of cryptography, I had learned one fundamental truth. Every code has a key. Every pattern has a breakpoint. And every performance, no matter how flawless, eventually reveals the actor behind the mask. I just had to keep looking. Morning came slowly, the way it does when you have not slept. I stood at the kitchen counter watching the sky lighten over the rooftops along Willard Street. Burlington. Waking up. Ordinary. And oblivious. My phone buzzed at 7:43. Ethan. A photo from a hotel lobby. Marble floors. Brass fixtures. Bauer Olak, Zurich. In the center of the frame, Nadia stood with a man. Mid-40s, charcoal suit, dark hair swept back. His hand rested on the small of her back with the casual authority of someone who had been placing it there for a long time. They were laughing. The text beneath was short. Checked in together. Same room. Dad. What do I do? I typed back carefully. Nothing yet. Observe only. I need time. Footsteps in the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of Nadia's old cardigans. Hair in a loose bun. She smiled. Good morning, Dad. Coffee? Please. I watched her move to the counter. She reached for the electric drip machine, measured grounds, filled the reservoir, pressed the button. Simple. Efficient. Wrong. The sèche sat on the shelf above the stove. A small copper pot with a long wooden handle that Helen had bought in Istanbul 30 years ago. It had gathered dust until Nadia arrived. Nadia brought it back to life. She had taught me the ritual during her first winter in the house. You never use a machine, Dad. You add cold water to the grounds. Heat it slowly. When the foam rises, pull it off. Heat again. 3 times. Never stir. Never rush. My grandmother taught my mother. My mother taught me. It was one of the few things Nadia shared about her childhood. The coffee ritual was sacred to her. 3 risings. Never stirred. Always from the sèche. every single morning for 2 years. This woman had just made drip coffee without glancing at the copper pot. I wrote in my notebook under the counter, out of sight. Test 1. Coffee. Failed. Over breakfast, I kept my voice easy. You know, I was thinking about your wedding. That song you two danced to. What was it again? She looked up from her toast. Her smile was instant. Oh, that beautiful song. A pause. Just a beat too long. It was so romantic. She did not say the name. She could not. Nadia would not have hesitated for half a second. She would have started humming before I finished the question. La Vie en Rose. She chose it because Helen used to play it on Sunday mornings while she cooked. Nadia wanted Helen's memory woven into the ceremony. She told me this the week before the wedding, sitting in this very kitchen. And she cried when she said it. I smiled and nodded. Of course. Beautiful song. Test 2. Wedding song. Failed. After breakfast, I left the newspaper open on the kitchen table, folded to the Sudoku puzzle. She settled into the chair around 10 with a pencil. I watched from my study doorway, pretending to read. She stared at the grid, then began filling in numbers. Tried a 4. Erased it. Tried a 7. Erased it. Tried a 9. Trial and error. Guessing. Nadia solved Sudoku the way I solved equations. Elimination logic. Scanning rows and columns. Narrowing possibilities through deduction before writing a single number. I had watched her complete a puzzle in under 4 minutes, her left hand moving across the grid with absolute confidence. This woman had been sitting there for 12 minutes and had filled in 3 squares. Test 3. Sudoku. Failed. Early afternoon, I set the final trap. I stood near the router in the living room and called to her casually. Hey, do you remember the Wi-Fi password? I'm trying to connect a new device. She appeared from the kitchen, glanced at the router, and crouched to read the sticker on the bottom. Try this one. She pointed to the manufacturer's default, a random string of letters and numbers. That was not our password. Nadia had changed it 2 years ago, the week she moved in. She replaced the default with Ethan's proposal date written backward in a numeric cipher. She recited it from memory every time someone asked, usually with a small, proud smile, as though she had invented a new form of encryption. This woman was reading a factory default off a sticker. Thanks, I said. That must be it. Test 4. Wi-Fi password. Failed. I returned to my study and closed the door. I opened the leather notebook and looked at the page. 4 tests. 4 failures. Each one small enough to explain away in isolation. A bad morning. A memory lapse. A change in routine. But taken together, viewed as a set, the probability of all 4 being coincidental was less than 0.003%. I wrote the number at the bottom of the page and circled it, 0.003. In 40 years of mathematics, I had never once argued with a number. I was not going to start now. The woman in my house was not Nadia. But evidence of what? A twin? A look-alike? An actress hired to take someone's place? And why? What was happening in Zurich that required Nadia to be in 2 places at once? I picked up my phone and called Ruth Calloway. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice carrying the brisk warmth of a woman who had spent 30 years in cybersecurity and had never once been surprised by how badly people could behave. Ruth, I need you to check something. Our family accounts, financial records, login history, anything unusual in the past 3 weeks. She did not ask why. She never did. How deep do you want me to go? As deep as it takes. A pause. Then her voice dropped half a register. Give me 2 hours. I hung up and looked out the window. The afternoon sun slanted through the maples, throwing long shadows across Willard Street. Somewhere in Zurich, Nadia was laughing in a hotel lobby with a man whose name I did not know. Somewhere in my kitchen, a woman who was not Nadia was humming a melody my daughter-in-law would never hum. And somewhere in the space between those two truths, there was a pattern I had not yet found. I looked down at my notebook. 4 tests. 4 failures. 0.003%. Day 2, I wrote. And I turned to a fresh page. Ruth called back in 93 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock the way I used to watch it during final exams, each minute a small act of discipline. Arthur, you were right to call me. This is worse than I expected. I closed my study door and sat down. Go ahead. Someone has been accessing your family accounts from a second device for the past 3 weeks. Login origin traces to Zurich. They've set up email forwarding rules on both your and Ethan's accounts. Every message from your bank, your investment firm, your insurance provider is being copied to an external server. Offshore. Encrypted. I felt the room shift, just slightly, the way a building shifts before you realize the foundation is cracked. How much access do they have? Everything. Checking, savings, brokerage, retirement. They've been monitoring every transaction in real time. And Arthur, there's a withdrawal pattern. Small amounts, always under $10,000. 9,500. Exactly. Repeated multiple times over the past 3 months. I recognized it immediately. Structuring. Keeping withdrawals below the federal reporting threshold of $10,000. Banks are required to file currency transaction reports for anything above that number. Whoever was behind this understood financial regulations well enough to move money without triggering automatic alerts. Classic structuring. I said quietly. Exactly. Ruth's voice was tight. This isn't amateur hour, Arthur. Someone has been systematically draining your accounts in amounts designed to avoid detection. Total so far, just under $90,000. And there's more. I found cryptocurrency transfers. The structured withdrawals are being converted and routed through anonymous wallets. I'm still tracing the endpoints, but this is layered. Professional. Can you track where the crypto ends up? I can try, but it takes time and leaves footprints. Whoever set this up knows what they're doing. Do it. Carefully. After I hung up, I sat in the dark of my study listening to the house. Through the wall, I could hear her moving in the kitchen. Cabinets opening and closing. Water running. Then humming. A melody I did not recognize. Something contemporary, rhythmic. Nadia hummed old standards. Chet Baker. Billie Holiday. Songs Helen had loved. Songs that had drawn them together across generations. This woman hummed something that belonged to a different life entirely. I added it to the notebook. Hums wrong melody. Jazz versus contemporary. Then I closed the notebook and thought about the laptop. 6 months ago, Nadia had told us her old laptop was dead. Water damage from a spill. She had shown us the screen, dark and unresponsive. And Ethan had offered to take it to the repair shop. Nadia waved him off. It's gone, she said. I already transferred everything to the new one. But people do not throw away laptops immediately. They set them aside, meaning to dispose of them later, and then forget. If Nadia had kept it somewhere in the house, and if it was not actually dead, there might be something on it worth finding. I waited until she went upstairs for an afternoon nap. Then I walked to the garage. The garage was Helen's territory once. Her gardening tools still hung on the pegboard wall. Her boots still sat by the door, cracked leather, and dried mud. I moved through the space methodically, checking shelves, opening boxes, pulling aside old tarps. I found it on the 3rd shelf, behind a box of Christmas ornaments. A silver laptop, thin and light, tucked inside a canvas tote bag. I pulled it out and pressed the power button. The screen flickered. Then it lit up. 7% battery. Not dead. Not water damaged. Not broken at all. The login screen appeared. Password required. I stared at it for a moment, then did what I had done my entire career. I looked for the pattern. Nadia used numerical patterns for everything. Her phone passcode was Ethan's birthday reversed. The Wi-Fi password was the proposal date backward. She thought in numbers the way musicians think in melody, instinctively, habitually, always returning to the same structures. I tried her birthday reversed. Rejected. Ethan's birthday reversed. Rejected. I paused, thought about it differently. Not a date she loved. A date that mattered to her for a different reason. I typed the date of their wedding. Reversed. With the year and a Caesar shift of 3. The screen unlocked. My hands were steady. My pulse was not. The desktop was sparse. A few folders, a browser, a messaging application. I opened the messages first. A thread dominated the screen. Conversation after conversation with a contact, saved only as S. No name, no photo. Just the letter. The messages were encrypted. Not heavily. I recognized the pattern within seconds. A Caesar cipher variant. Each letter shifted by a fixed number. It was the kind of code a clever amateur would use. Someone who understood the concept of encryption but lacked the depth to implement anything truly secure. For a retired cryptography professor, it was the equivalent of a locked diary with the key taped to the cover. I grabbed a pencil and my notebook and began decoding by hand. The first message was dated 11 weeks ago. How much longer with the setup? Another week. She's learning the routines. He suspects anything? No. He's predictable. Won't check until it's too late. My jaw tightened. He. The old man. Me. I kept decoding. The messages spanned months. Planning, coordination, updates. Then I reached a message sent 3 weeks ago. The night before Nadia left the house. The night before the woman in my kitchen arrived. Burlington is cleaner than Vienna. The old man sees nothing. Phase 3. Ready. Ease credentials, active. The laptop battery warning flashed. 3%. I wrote the decoded message in my notebook. Every word exact. Then, the screen died. Going black in my hands. I sat in the garage holding the dead laptop, staring at the words I had just written. Burlington is cleaner than Vienna. Vienna. Someone in Vienna had gone through what I was going through now. Someone in Vienna had been the previous version of me. The earlier draft of this same story. And whoever that person was, whatever had happened to them, Nadia and her partner considered it a success worth improving upon. The old man sees nothing. That was what they thought of me. The retired professor in the old house. Harmless. Predictable. Blind. I closed the notebook. My hand was trembling now. Not from fear, but from something colder and slower. Anger. The kind that does not burn. The kind that calculates. I placed the dead laptop back in the canvas tote and returned it to the shelf behind the Christmas ornaments. Then I walked back inside, past the kitchen where she was making tea, past the living room where Nadia's books sat on the shelf like props in a stage play, and into my study. I closed the door, opened my notebook to the page where I had written the decoded message, and I underlined one word 3 times. Vienna. I read the message again. And again. Burlington is cleaner than Vienna. The old man sees nothing. The old man. That was me. That was what they called me in their encrypted messages, in their careful plans, in the private language of people who had decided I was harmless. The old man. The retired professor who drank coffee in his study and tended his dead wife's garden and never looked too closely at anything because grief had made him soft. I had spent 40 years teaching young minds to see beneath the surface of numbers. I had consulted on federal fraud cases. I had published papers on pattern recognition that were still cited in academic journals. And these people had reduced me to 2 words. Old man. Something shifted in my chest. Not fear. Not sadness. Something colder. Something that sat very still and watched and waited. I had written down the decoded message before the laptop died. Now I worked from my notebook, reconstructing the cipher key from the fragments I had already cracked. The shift pattern was consistent. Once you had the key, the rest was arithmetic. I decoded 6 more messages over the next hour, writing each one in precise block letters. Vienna target neutralized. Assets secured in 14 months. Clean exit. Burlington timeline accelerated. Ease flight schedule creates natural absences. Florida model refined. Grief approach confirmed most effective for 60-plus males. N performing well. The sister needs 1 more week to learn the routines. Phase 3 ready. Ease credentials active. Insurance modification complete. Exit window closes in 6 weeks. Finalize offshore transfers before December. I set down the pencil and stared at the page. Each message was a piece. Together they formed a picture I did not want to see, but could no longer deny. Vienna target neutralized. Someone in Vienna had been targeted before me. Assets secured in 14 months meant they had spent over a year extracting money before disappearing. Clean exit meant no one had caught them. Florida model refined. There had been another victim between Vienna and Burlington, in Florida. A grief approach targeting men over 60. Widowers, men like me, still carrying the shape of their wives in the empty side of the bed. Ease credentials active. Ethan's login information was being used. Not just monitored, used. Someone was accessing systems under my son's name. Insurance modification complete. I did not yet know what that meant, but the word insurance sat in my stomach like a stone. The sister. The sister needs 1 more week. The woman in my house was someone's sister. Nadia's sister. That was the variable I had been missing. Not a hired actress. Not a random look-alike. A sister. Possibly a twin. I closed the notebook and pressed my palms against my eyes. 3 cities. 3 victims. A system refined through practice, moving from country to country, identity to identity, family to family. And now they were here. In my house. In my family. Working on me. I picked up my phone and called Dennis Kowalski. Dennis was 63, a retired police inspector who had spent 30 years with the Burlington Police Department before his knees gave out and his wife gave up, though not necessarily in that order. We had been friends for 20 years, bonded over Sunday afternoon chess games at the cafe on Church Street. Dennis played the way he investigated. Methodically, patiently, always 3 moves ahead. He answered on the second ring. Arthur, it's been a while. You finally ready to admit I'm the better chess player? Dennis, I need your help. Not chess. Something personal. His tone shifted immediately, the humor draining out like water from a cracked glass. What kind of personal? The kind that involves my family and someone who needs to be found. I told him everything. The phone call from Ethan. The footage. The tests. The laptop. The messages. Vienna. Florida. The sister. Dennis listened without interrupting. The way only a man who has conducted 1,000 interviews can listen. Absorbing everything. Filing it. Connecting it. When I finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. Then he spoke. Vienna. That's Interpol territory. I still have contacts from the exchange program I did in 2008. Give me the keyword. Vienna, and whatever names you've got. And I'll find your ghost. I don't have names yet. Just a letter. S. That's enough to start. Give me a day. After I hung up, I made coffee. The drip machine, not the sezve. The sezve belonged to Nadia, and touching it now felt like handling evidence. She appeared in the doorway while I was pouring. She watched me with that expression Nadia often wore. Gentle concern. Slight tilt of the head. You seem distracted today, Dad. Everything all right? I measured my words carefully. Just a busy week ahead. You know how I get when I'm working through a problem. She accepted this and walked to the counter to make her own cup. I watched her stir it. 2 quick circles. No tap on the rim. Nadia had a ritual. 3 circles clockwise. 2 taps with the spoon on the rim of the mug. Then she would set the spoon down on the right side of the cup. Always. Every time. For 2 years, across hundreds of mornings. The rhythm never changed. It was the kind of thing you absorb without conscious effort. The way you learn the cadence of someone's breathing when you sit beside them long enough. This woman stirred twice and set the spoon in the sink. I added it to the notebook later, behind the closed door of my study. Stirring pattern. 2 circles. No tap versus 3 circles. 2 taps. Another data point. Another crack in the mask. I sat at my desk and looked at the page. The decoded messages stared back at me. Vienna, Florida, Burlington. 3 cities. 1 pattern. A system built on grief, refined through repetition, and aimed at men who had lost the person they loved most. Men like Harold in Florida, whoever he was. Men like the target in Vienna. Men like me. I thought about Helen. About the way she used to tease me for seeing patterns in everything. Numbers, behaviors, the angle of light through the kitchen window. She called it my beautiful madness. You see the whole world as an equation, Arthur. One day, that's going to save someone. I looked at the notebook, at the decoded messages, at the careful handwriting, documenting every test, every failure, every crack in the performance. Maybe today was that day. I turned to a fresh page and wrote at the top, what I know, what I need, what I'm going to do. Then I began to plan. Dennis called back faster than I expected. Less than 20 hours. When I saw his name on the screen, I knew he had found something. Because Dennis never called early, unless the news was worth delivering in person, or as close to it as a phone allowed. Arthur. I found her. Margarethe Voss. Vienna. She's been waiting 10 years for someone to believe her. I sat down at my desk and opened the notebook to a clean page. Tell me everything. Her husband was Friedrich Voss, professor of financial economics at the University of Vienna, 68 years old at the time of his arrest. Respected, published, sat on 3 advisory boards for the Austrian Ministry of Finance, the kind of man whose reputation was built over decades of careful, quiet work. Dennis paused. I could hear him turning pages on his end. Notes. Dennis always took notes by hand. Just like me. 10 years ago, Friedrich was charged with financial espionage. The prosecution claimed he had been funneling university research funds into offshore accounts, skimming grant money and redirecting it through a series of shell companies. The evidence was digital. Login records, transfer authorizations, account signatures, all pointing directly at Friedrich. Was it real? His wife says no. She's maintained his innocence for a decade. No one listened. Friedrich was convicted, sentenced to 12 years in an Austrian federal prison. I waited. There was always more with Dennis. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack in his cell. He was 75. Margarethe says the stress killed him. She says he stopped eating in the last year because he couldn't live with the shame of something he didn't do. The room was very quiet. I could hear the old house settling around me, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind against the windows. Somewhere in my kitchen, a woman, who was not my daughter-in-law, was making lunch. How did it happen? I asked. The setup. How did they get to Friedrich? A woman. Dennis's voice was flat. She appeared at an academic conference in Salzburg, introduced herself as a research assistant, looking for a faculty mentor. Young, bright, charming. She called herself Anya. I felt the name settle into my chest like a cold weight. Anya became Friedrich's research assistant. She worked closely with him for 18 months, had access to his university credentials, his email, his office computer. Marguerite says Friedrich trusted her completely. He even invited her to dinner at their home several times. Then one morning, Friedrich was arrested. The police had evidence of the offshore transfers, his credentials, his digital signature, his login history. And Anya was gone, vanished. No forwarding address, no records, no trace. Dennis let the silence hang for a moment. Sound familiar? Tu familiar. I arranged the video call with Marguerite for that afternoon. Dennis provided the connection through his Interpol contacts. She lived alone now in a small apartment in Vienna's 3rd district, the home she and Friedrich had shared before everything was taken. The screen flickered and her face appeared. Margrethe Voss was 71 years old. She had the kind of face that had once been beautiful and was now something better. Honest. Her hair was white, cropped short. Her hands trembled slightly where they rested on the table in front of her. But her eyes were the sharpest things in the room. They looked at me the way a woman looks at someone when she has spent a decade being ignored and has finally found a person who might actually listen. Herr Brennan. She spoke careful English with a soft Austrian accent. Dennis tells me you are going through something similar to what happened to my Friedrich. I believe so, yes. She nodded slowly. Then I will tell you what I have told the police, the lawyers, the journalists, and anyone who would listen for the past 10 years. My husband was innocent. He was destroyed by a woman who pretended to admire him. She told me about Anya. How she had appeared at the Salzburg conference with perfect credentials and a research proposal that aligned exactly with Friedrich's work. How she had been attentive, respectful, brilliant. How she had laughed at Friedrich's jokes and remembered his birthday and brought flowers to Margrethe on their wedding anniversary. She made Friedrich feel seen, Marguerite said quietly. After 40 years in academia, he felt invisible. And then this young woman appeared and told him his work mattered, that he mattered. Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. He trusted her with everything. His passwords, his files, his reputation, and she used all of it to bury him. I opened the photo on my phone. The image from Zurich. Nadia. And the man at Barrow Lock. I held it up to the camera. Margrethe. Have you ever seen this woman before? She leaned forward. Her face changed. The controlled composure fractured. And beneath it I saw 10 years of grief, rage, and the terrible relief of being believed. Her hand rose to her mouth. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then her voice came out in a whisper. That is her. That is Anya. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them. She let them fall. She destroyed my Friedrich. She took his reputation, his freedom, his health. He died in a prison cell believing the world thought he was a thief. He was not a thief. He was a good man who trusted the wrong person. I held the phone steady. I know, Margaretha. I believe you. She looked at me through the screen with those sharp, wounded eyes. Can you stop her? I thought about the notebook on my desk, the decoded messages, the 4 failed tests, the camera footage, the financial records, the pattern stretching from Vienna to Florida to Burlington, a trail of broken families and stolen futures. I will stop her, I said. And I will prove Friedrich was innocent. I promise you that. Margrethe was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once. The way you nod, when you have finally heard the words you have been waiting a decade to hear. Friedrich would have liked you, she said softly. He always respected a man who believed in proof. After the call ended, I sat in my study staring at the dark screen. The afternoon light had shifted, throwing long shadows across the desk. The house was quiet. Through the wall, I could hear the faint sound of pages turning. The woman in the living room, reading her book, performing her role. Margrethe Voss was 71 years old. Her husband had died in an Austrian prison for a crime he did not commit. She had spent 10 years telling anyone who would listen that he was innocent, and no one had believed her. She had watched the man she loved waste away behind bars, destroyed by shame and heartbreak, while the woman who had framed him disappeared into a new city, a new name, a new target. That was the future waiting for me if I failed. That was the future waiting for Ethan. A prison cell. A crime he did not commit. A life, measured in visiting hours and appeals, that went nowhere. Friedrich Voss had died because no one saw the pattern in time. I opened my notebook and looked at the page. Vienna, Florida, Burlington. 3 cities, 3 families, 1 system, and now I was inside it, watching it happen in real time from the center of my own living room. I picked up my pen and added 1 line beneath the decoded messages. I see it now. All of it. Then I closed the notebook and reached for the phone. There was more to find. The insurance. The credentials. The name behind the letter S. The sister. The full scope of what they had planned for Ethan. I was not going to let my son become the next Friedrich Voss. The morning arrived wrapped in fog. Arthur stood at the kitchen window, coffee untouched, watching the mist crawl across the backyard like something alive. Behind him, Katya hummed a melody he didn't recognize. Not the old Ukrainian lullaby Nadia used to hum while washing dishes. Something sharper, something rehearsed. He added it to the notebook. Entry 47. Ruth Calloway's email arrived at 7:41. The subject line contained a single word. Urgent. Arthur opened it at his desk, door locked, volume muted. Ruth had attached 3 documents. The first was a PDF showing the login history for Ethan's life insurance portal. Someone had accessed the account 14 times in the past 19 days. Every login originated from the same device, the second phone Ruth had flagged, the one pinging from Zurich before it went dark. The second document stopped Arthur's breathing for 4 full seconds. It was a beneficiary change form for Ethan's life insurance policy. The original beneficiary had been Arthur Brennan, listed since Ethan first purchased the policy 8 years ago. 3 weeks ago, the beneficiary had been changed. The new name was Nadia Petrescu Brennan. The signature matched Ethan's, but Ethan hadn't signed it. Arthur knew this with the certainty of a man who had watched his son learn to write cursive at the kitchen table 30 years ago. The downstroke on the capital E was wrong. Ethan always dragged it slightly left, a habit inherited from Helen, who had been left-handed. This signature pulled right. Confident, mechanical, forged. The policy was worth $1.2 million. Arthur sat back in his chair and let the number settle into his chest like a stone dropped into still water. 1.2 million. That was the price they had placed on his son's life. Not metaphorically, not abstractly. They had calculated the value of Ethan Brennan's death and determined it was worth the effort. The third document was a comparison chart Ruth had built. She had pulled records from 3 insurance companies, cross-referencing policy modifications with the timeline of Katya's infiltration. The results were clean and devastating. Ethan's health insurance had been modified to remove his primary care physician and replace the emergency contact with a phone number registered to a prepaid SIM card. His auto insurance had a new rider, a roadside assistance clause that, if triggered under specific mechanical failure conditions, would delay emergency response by routing the call through a third-party dispatcher instead of 911 directly. Arthur read that paragraph 3 times. Then he read it again. They weren't just stealing money. They were engineering a scenario in which Ethan could die, and every system designed to save him would fail. The insurance modifications weren't paperwork. They were architecture. Load-bearing walls in a structure built to collapse on one man. He picked up the phone and called Ruth. She answered on the first ring. "I need you to check something else," he said. Ethan's car. He drives a 2021 Volvo XC60. Find out if anyone has accessed his dealership service account or modified his maintenance schedule. Ruth was quiet for 3 seconds. "You think they're going after the vehicle?" "I think they've already gone after it," Arthur said. "The insurance changes aren't protection. They're preparation. You don't reroute emergency calls unless you know there's going to be an emergency." "I'll have it within 2 hours," Ruth said. Arthur, be careful with that woman in your house. He hung up and opened the notebook. Entry 48. Insurance policy beneficiary changed to Nadia. Forged signature, $1. 2M. Health insurance emergency contact, rerouted. Auto insurance delayed dispatch clause. Pattern, not theft. Premeditated harm. Possible target, Ethan's vehicle. Arthur closed his eyes. Helen's face appeared behind his eyelids, the way it always did when the world became unbearable. She was sitting in the garden, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, laughing at something he had said. He couldn't remember the joke. He could only remember the sound. "What would you do, Helen?" he whispered. She would have burned the house down. Helen Brennan had been the fierce one, the one who threw a glass of wine in the face of a department chair, who had insulted their son's stutter at a faculty dinner. Arthur was the methodical one, the patient one, the one who recorded data and waited for patterns to emerge. But patience had a limit, and Arthur could feel it approaching like a train on a track he couldn't step off. At 11:15, Katya knocked on his study door. "I made lunch, Dad. Tomato soup. Your favorite." His favorite was French onion. Nadia knew that. She had made it every Sunday for 3 years. "Sounds wonderful," he said. "I'll be right out." He ate the soup. He smiled. He complimented the seasoning. And when Katya turned to wash the dishes, he photographed the soup bowl, the brand of tomatoes on the counter, and the pot she had used. He didn't know why yet, but Arthur Brennan had learned something in 64 years of living. Document everything. Understanding comes later. At 2:17, Ruth called back. Her voice was different now. Flatter. The way people sound when they've found something they wish they hadn't. "Someone accessed Ethan's Volvo service portal 6 days ago," she said. "They canceled his upcoming brake inspection, the one scheduled for next Tuesday, and they submitted a request to delay the recall notice for his model's fuel line connector. The request was flagged as owner-initiated." "Ethan didn't submit that request," Arthur said. "No," Ruth agreed. "The login came from the same Zurich device." "Arthur, this isn't financial fraud anymore. This is something else." Arthur looked at the notebook. 48 entries. 3 weeks of observations. 4 failed tests. 6 decoded messages. 3 cities. $1.2 million. And now a canceled brake inspection on his son's car. The pattern wasn't emerging. It had been there all along. He had simply been too close to see it. Vienna had ended with Friedrich Voss dying in what was ruled a natural cardiac event. His assets transferred to a woman who vanished 3 days after the funeral. Burlington was designed to end the same way. But they had refined the method. No poison. No violence that could be traced. Just a series of small modifications, a rerouted emergency call, a delayed brake inspection, a fuel line left unrepaired that would converge on a single moment when Ethan's car would fail, and no one would arrive in time. Arthur closed the notebook. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 31 years. It rang 4 times. "Margaret Stone's office." A voice answered. "How may I direct your call?" "My name is Arthur Brennan," he said. "I'm a retired professor of mathematics. I need to speak with Margaret Stone about freezing my son's assets, filing a fraud injunction, and possibly preventing a murder. I have documentation. I have evidence. And I have very little time." The line was silent for a moment. "Please hold, Mr. Brennan." Arthur held. Outside his window, the fog had burned away. The yard was bright and sharp and ruthlessly clear, the way the world looks when you finally stop pretending you can't see what's right in front of you. Margaret Stone did not waste words. She never had. Arthur remembered this from 31 years ago, when she had represented the university in a tenure dispute that had nearly cost him his career. She had been 42 then, sharp-jawed and precise. The kind of woman who entered a courtroom the way a surgeon enters an operating theater, already knowing where to cut. Now she was 73, and the precision had only deepened. They met at her office on Church Street at 4:15 that afternoon. Arthur had driven 17 minutes through downtown Burlington with his notebook on the passenger seat, secured beneath a folded newspaper like contraband. Katya had asked where he was going. "Pharmacy," he had said. "My blood pressure. Prescription." She had nodded and smiled. The smile was perfect. Every time. Margaret's office occupied the third floor of a converted Victorian. The waiting room smelled of leather and old paper. A paralegal led Arthur down a narrow hallway, lined with framed verdicts, not diplomas, not awards, but verdicts. Victories mounted on the wall like a hunter's trophies. Arthur counted 9 before the hallway ended. She was standing behind her desk when he entered, shorter than he remembered. Hair white now, cut close to the skull. Eyes unchanged, dark brown, unblinking. Cataloging him the way Ruth cataloged data, quickly and without sentiment. "Sit down, Arthur," she said. "Tell me everything. Leave nothing out. If you think a detail is irrelevant, tell me anyway. I decide what matters," he told her. From the beginning. Ethan's call, from JFK. The security footage, Nadia leaving at 8:12, Katya entering at 8:51. The 4 tests. The coffee. The wedding song. The Sudoku. The Wi-Fi password. The decoded Caesar cipher messages. Vienna. Burlington. Florida. The 6 messages. From S. Ruth's financial audit, $89,000 in structured withdrawals, cryptocurrency endpoints still being traced. The insurance modifications, the forged beneficiary change, the canceled brake inspection, the fuel line recall suppression, the $1.2 million policy. Margaret did not interrupt. She did not take notes. She sat with her hands folded on the desk, watching his face the way a chess player watches the board. Not the pieces, but the spaces between them. When he finished, the room was silent for 11 seconds. Arthur counted. "How many people know what you've told me?" she asked. 3. Arthur said. "Ruth Calloway. Dennis Kowalski. And now you. Your son?" "Not yet." Margaret leaned back. Her chair did not creak. "Good. Don't tell him yet. If Ethan reacts emotionally and confronts the woman in your house, 2 things happen. First, she alerts her handler. This, Stefan Volkov. Second, they accelerate the exit strategy, move the money, and disappear. We lose leverage. We lose evidence. We lose them." Arthur nodded. He had already reached the same conclusion. But hearing it from Margaret made it heavier. Not telling Ethan meant letting his son continue living in a house with a woman who was planning his death. Every hour of silence was a calculation, safety measured against strategy. Arthur was not certain which variable weighed more. Margaret opened a drawer and removed a yellow legal pad. She wrote in block letters, each stroke deliberate. "Here is what I can do today," she said. "First, I file an emergency ex parte motion to freeze all joint accounts held by Ethan and Nadia Brennan. The grounds are documented unauthorized access and fraudulent beneficiary modification. A judge can sign this by tomorrow morning if I file before 5:30. That gives us 90 minutes. She kept writing. "Second, I prepare a fraud injunction targeting the insurance policy change. The forged signature is our strongest piece. I will need the original document and a verified sample of Ethan's handwriting for a forensic comparison. Can you get that?" "I have 30 years of birthday cards," Arthur said. "That will do." Third, I contact the Vermont Attorney General's office and request a preliminary investigation. This moves it from civil to criminal. Once the AG is involved, subpoena power opens up. We can compel the insurance companies to release full access logs. We can subpoena the Zurich IP records through mutual legal assistance treaties. And we can flag Stefan Volkov's name in federal databases. She looked up from the pad. "But Arthur, There is a fourth thing, and it is the most important. You said someone canceled your son's brake inspection and suppressed a fuel line recall. That is not fraud. That is attempted murder. And attempted murder is not my jurisdiction. I know, Arthur said. Have you contacted the police? Dennis is working through Interpol channels. He's looking for connections to the Vienna case Friedrich Voss. Margaret set down her pen. Friedrich Voss. I know that name. His estate was contested in a Viennese probate court 18 months ago. A woman named Marguerite Voss, his widow, retained a firm in Zurich to challenge the transfer of assets to an unknown beneficiary. The case was sealed. She paused. The beneficiary's name was listed as Elena Mirescu. Arthur felt the room shift. Elena Mirescu. The surname hit him like a hand against his chest. Mirescu. Petrescu. The phonetic echo was unmistakable. Margaret watched his face. You see it, she said. It was not a question. Petrescu, Arthur whispered. Nadia Petrescu. Katya Petrescu. Elena Mirescu. They're rotating surnames. Slavic roots. Similar suffixes. Close enough to feel authentic. Different enough to pass background checks. Margaret picked up her pen again. I'm adding a fifth action item. I'm contacting Margaretha Voss directly, if she can identify the woman who infiltrated her husband's life. And if that woman matches your Nadia or your Katya, we don't just have a fraud case. We have a pattern. Patterns are what convict people, Arthur. Not single incidents. Patterns. She stood and extended her hand. Go home. Act normal. Make no changes to your routine. Do not confront the woman. Do not warn Ethan yet. I will call you when the freeze order is signed. Arthur shook her hand. Her grip was dry and firm and absolute. He drove home through streets, turning gold with late afternoon light. The radio played something classical Debussy, he thought, though he couldn't name the piece. Helen would have known. Helen had known every piece of music the way Arthur knew every theorem. They had been complementary that way. Two halves of a proof that only worked when placed together. His phone buzzed at a red light. Dennis Kowalski. Arthur, listen carefully. Interpol Vienna responded. They have an open file on a Stefan Volkov, also known as Sergei Volkov, also known as Martin Kreis, 47 years old. Ukrainian passport, German residency. Last known address in Zurich. He is connected to 4 cases across 3 countries. Austria, Germany, and now the United States. The pattern is identical every time. He targets widowers, or men with recently deceased wives. He uses women always young, always from Eastern European backgrounds to infiltrate the family. The women rotate. The names rotate. But the method does not change. Arthur pulled into his driveway. The house was lit from within. Through the living room window, he could see Katya on the couch, reading. She turned a page. She looked up. She waved. 4 cases, Arthur said quietly. How many deaths? Dennis paused. 2 confirmed. 1 suspected. Friedrich Voss was the suspected case. And the 4th? Still active, Dennis said. Burlington, Vermont. That's you, Arthur. Your case number 4. Arthur turned off the engine. The house glowed warm and golden and false. Inside, a woman who was not his daughter-in-law sat in his dead wife's favorite chair, reading a book she would never finish, waiting for a plan to reach its conclusion. He opened the car door. He walked toward the light. The video call connected at 9:22 in the morning. Arthur sat in his study with the door locked and the blinds drawn. The screen flickered once, then resolved into a face he had never seen but immediately understood. Margaretha Voss was 71 years old. Her hair was silver and pulled back tight. Her eyes were pale blue, the kind of blue that comes from decades of alpine winters, and they held the particular stillness of someone who had already lost the thing that mattered most and knew that nothing else could hurt her quite the same way. Margaret Stone appeared in a second window, her camera angled precisely at her face, no background visible. She had arranged this call in under 16 hours. Arthur did not know how. He suspected it involved favors older than some of his students. "Mrs. Voss," Margaret said, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I know this is difficult." Margaretha's mouth tightened. "Difficult is not the word," she said. Her English was accented but exact, each syllable placed with Germanic precision. "Difficult is a word for examinations and steep hills. What happened to my husband was not difficult. It was designed." Arthur leaned forward. The word landed in his chest like a nail. Designed. The same word he had used in his notebook 3 days ago. Entry 31. "These modifications are not accidents. They are designed." "Please," Arthur said. "Tell us about Friedrich." Margaret folded her hands. Her knuckles were swollen with arthritis, the joints thick and curved. She looked down at them, as if deciding where to begin. Then she looked up, directly into the camera, directly into Arthur's eyes, and began. Friedrich retired from the University of Vienna in 2020. He was a professor of mechanical engineering, 68 years old, healthy, strong. He walked 4 kilometers every morning along the Danube Canal. He could repair any machine ever built. He once rebuilt a 1957 tractor engine from memory on a Sunday afternoon because he was bored. She paused. He was not a weak man. That is important for you to understand. They did not choose him because he was weak. They chose him because he was alone. Arthur's throat tightened. He understood. "I was diagnosed with early-stage lymphoma in March of 2021, Margaret continued. The treatment required hospitalization, 3 rounds of chemotherapy over 4 months. Friedrich was alone in the house for the first time in 46 years. He did not know how to be alone. He had never learned." She paused again. "I think that is the thing they look for. Not weakness. Absence. A space where someone used to be." Margaret Stone's pen moved across her legal pad. She did not look up. She did not need to. Margaret continued. "A woman approached Friedrich at a grief support group. He had joined it at his doctor's suggestion, not because I had died, but because the oncologist said that spouses of cancer patients often experience anticipatory grief. The woman's name was Alina. She said her husband had died of pancreatic cancer. She was 29. Beautiful. Compassionate. She listened to Friedrich the way I used to listen to him completely, with her whole body turned toward him, as though his words were the most important sounds in the world." Arthur closed his eyes. He saw Katya on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, turning toward him with that perfect attentive tilt of her head. The gesture he had mistaken for affection. The gesture that was choreography. Alina did not seduce Friedrich, Margaretha said firmly. "I want that to be clear. She did not sleep with him. She did not flirt. She became something more dangerous. She became his companion, his friend, the person who called every evening at 7 to ask if he had eaten, the person who drove him to my hospital visits and waited in the car reading a book. She was patient. She was consistent. She was there." "How long?" Arthur asked. 14 months, Margaret said. The exact number sent a cold line down Arthur's spine. The decoded message had said Vienna target neutralized assets secured in 14 months. 14 months. Not an estimate, a timeline, a schedule adhered to with mechanical precision. Margaret's voice did not waver. After 14 months, Alina introduced Friedrich to a financial advisor, a man named Martin Kreis. Tall, well-dressed, polite. He said he specialized in retirement portfolios for academics. He knew the language of our world tenure, pension structures, emeritus benefits. Friedrich trusted him because Alina trusted him, and Friedrich trusted Alina because she had spent 14 months earning it. "Martin Kreis," Arthur said. Dennis had mentioned that name. Stefan Volkov. also known as Sergei Volkov, also known as Martin Kreis. Margarethy nodded as if she could hear his thoughts. Within 3 months, Martin Kreis had restructured Friedrich's pension, redirected his investment accounts, and established a new will. The will named Alina as the primary beneficiary of our home and savings. Friedrich signed it. He signed everything Martin placed in front of him. I was in the hospital. I did not know. Her hands trembled once. She pressed them flat against the table. In November of 2022, Friedrich died. The official cause was cardiac arrest. He was 69 years old, with no history of heart disease. The autopsy found elevated levels of potassium in his bloodstream, but the coroner ruled it consistent with dietary supplements Friedrich had been taking. Supplements that Alina had purchased for him. Supplements that she personally measured and mixed into his morning tea every day for the last 3 months of his life. The room was very quiet. Arthur could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the old house settling around him, the wooden beams adjusting to temperature the way they had for 100 years, indifferent to the horrors being spoken inside their walls. I came home from the hospital in January, Margarethe said. The house was empty. Friedrich was buried. Alina was gone. Martin Kreis was gone. The accounts were drained. The will was filed. I had nothing, except the house itself, which they had not yet managed to transfer. She looked at her hands again. I was 70 years old, recovering from chemotherapy, and I had to hire a lawyer in Zurich to fight for the right to keep the home my husband and I had shared for 4 decades. Margaret Stone spoke for the first time in several minutes. Mrs. Voss, did you ever see Alina again? No, Margarethy said. She vanished completely. But 6 months later, the Zurich police showed me a photograph from a surveillance camera in Frankfurt. A woman matching Alina's description was seen entering an apartment building with a man matching Martin Kreis. The police said the image was inconclusive. I looked at it for 1 hour. It was her. I know the way she held her shoulders. I know the way she tilted her head when she listened. Arthur opened his notebook. He turned to a blank page and wrote a single line. The tilt of the head. Katya does it too. They teach them this. Mrs. Voss, Arthur said. His voice was steady but low, the voice of a man speaking across a bridge he was still building. I believe the people who did this to Friedrich are in my house right now. A different woman. The same method. The same man behind it. My son is the target. Margaretha looked at him. Her blue eyes held his through 2 cameras and an ocean and 31 months of grief. Then she said the words that Arthur would carry for the rest of his life. Then you must do what I could not, Professor Brennan. You must stop them before the tea. The call ended at 10:19. Arthur sat in the silence of his study for a long time. On the desk, the notebook lay open. 49 entries, 3 countries, 2 confirmed deaths, 1 woman in his living room, and a ticking clock he could no longer ignore. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Dennis Kowalski. 4 words. We need to move. Dennis Kowalski arrived at the house at 6 in the morning, before the sky had finished turning light. He parked 2 blocks away and walked through the neighbor's backyard, crossing the fence at a point Arthur had described behind the old maple, where the slats had loosened after last winter's ice storm. Arthur met him at the back door. They had not seen each other in person for 3 weeks. Dennis looked the same as always. Broad shoulders, thick hands, a face built for endurance rather than expression. But his eyes were different. Sharper. The eyes of a man who had spent 40 years reading crime scenes and could see one forming in real time. Katya was still asleep upstairs. Arthur had checked at 5:45. Her door was closed. The hallway was silent. He had placed a thin strip of transparent tape across the bottom of her door frame 2 nights ago, an old counterintelligence trick Dennis had taught him over chess. The tape was unbroken. She had not left her room. They sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, speaking in voices barely above breath. Dennis placed a folder on the table. Inside were 4 printed photographs. The first showed Stefan Volkov's square jaw, cropped dark hair, gray eyes taken from an Interpol surveillance database. The second showed the same man entering a Zurich bank under the name Martin Kreis. The third was a blurred Frankfurt street camera image of a woman matching Alina's description. The fourth was new. Arthur had not seen it before. It showed a man sitting at an outdoor cafe in Burlington. The timestamp read 11 days ago. The man was Stefan Volkov. "He's here," Dennis said. Arthur's hands went still on the table. "Not in Zurich, not in Vienna. Here, Burlington. He's been in the city for at least 11 days. This was taken by a traffic camera on Church Street, 3 blocks from Margaret Stone's office. Interpol flagged it overnight. Arthur stared at the photograph. 11 days. Stefan Volkov had been 3 blocks from this house, walking the same streets, breathing the same air, while Arthur had been sitting in his study, decoding messages and running tests. The predator had not been distant. He had been circling, Dennis continued. Interpol has confirmed 4 cases. Vienna, Friedrich Voss. Munich, a retired surgeon named Hans Becker died of an apparent stroke, assets transferred to a woman named Katarina Dragovic. Katarina. Arthur felt the name settle against his ribs. Katarina. Katya. The diminutive form. They weren't even changing the names significantly. They were abbreviating them, the way a corporation abbreviates a brand for different markets. The third case, Dennis said. Tampa, Florida. A widower named Gerald Hutchins, 71. Still alive. His daughter discovered irregularities in his accounts before the scheme reached completion. The woman involved identified herself as Natalia Petrovic. She disappeared before police could question her. The financial advisor used the name Stefan Marsh. Arthur wrote the names in his notebook. Alina, Katarina, Natalia, Nadia, Katya. 5 names. Possibly 2 women. Possibly 3. All Slavic. All ending in the vowel sound that made them feel soft and approachable and trustworthy. The linguistics of deception, and we are number 4, Arthur said. Dennis nodded. Which means we have something the others didn't. We have advance warning. Friedrich Voss didn't know until he was dead. Hans Becker's family didn't know until the money was gone. Gerald Hutchins got lucky his daughter was suspicious. But you, Arthur, you figured it out while the operation is still active. That gives us a window. How long? Dennis looked at the folder. The decoded message said the exit window closes in 6 weeks. That message was sent 3 weeks ago. So we have approximately 3 weeks, maybe less. If they sense something has changed, Arthur calculated. 3 weeks. 21 days. 504 hours. He could work with that. He had solved differential equations, with less time and fewer variables. At 8:15, Arthur's phone vibrated. Margaret Stone. He stepped into the garage and answered. The freeze order is signed, Margaret said. All joint accounts between Ethan and Nadia Brennan are frozen as of 7:45 this morning. The judge reviewed the documentation overnight. He called it, and I'm quoting, the most methodically assembled fraud brief he'd seen in 30 years of family court. Your notebook impressed him, Arthur. Arthur did not feel impressed. He felt the clock. Margaret continued. I've also filed the fraud injunction on the insurance policy. The beneficiary change is suspended, pending forensic handwriting analysis. And I spoke with the Vermont AG's office. They're assigning an investigator. But Arthur, I have something else. I reached Margaretha Voss last night after our call. She's agreed to provide a sworn deposition identifying Stefan Volkov as Martin Kreis. She will also testify that the photograph of Alina matches a woman she saw in Friedrich's company repeatedly over 14 months. This gives us cross-jurisdictional evidence linking Volkov to at least 2 confirmed cases. Arthur exhaled. The architecture of the counterattack was taking shape. Legal channels. Financial locks. International testimony. But there was still a gap. A critical one. Margaret, he said. We need to tell Ethan. The line was quiet for 4 seconds. Yes, Margaret said. You do. And it needs to happen today. Because once the account freeze triggers a notification, and it will, within 24 to 48 hours, the woman in your house will know something has changed. If Ethan doesn't understand the situation before that moment, his reaction could compromise everything. Arthur hung up and returned to the kitchen. Dennis was studying the photographs, arranging them in chronological order on the table. Vienna, Munich, Tampa, Burlington. A timeline of predation laid out on Arthur's kitchen table like a hand of cards. I have to call my son, Arthur said. Dennis looked up. He nodded once. Do you want me to stay? Arthur considered this. No, he said. This conversation belongs to a father and his son. No one else. Dennis gathered the photographs and placed them back in the folder. He left the way he had come through the backyard, over the fence, past the maple. Arthur watched him disappear into the morning light and thought of all the invisible architectures that hold a life together. Trust, routine, the assumption that the people in your house are who they say they are. He had built 64 years on those architectures, and now he was about to tear them down for his son, brick by brick, in a single phone call. He dialed Ethan's number at 9:31. Ethan answered on the second ring. Hey, Dad. Everything okay? Arthur sat down in Helen's chair. The cushion still held the shape of her, even after all these years, a ghost pressed into fabric and foam. He placed his hand on the armrest where her hand used to rest. He took one breath, then another. Ethan, he said, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not react. Do not raise your voice. Do not change your expression if anyone is near you. Can you do that? A pause. Dad, you're scaring me. Good, Arthur said. Because what I'm about to tell you should scare you. And then it should make you very, very precise. The woman living in our house is not Nadia. She has never been Nadia. And the people behind her are planning something much worse than stealing our money. The line went silent. Arthur could hear his son breathing short, shallow, accelerating. The sound of a man whose world was cracking beneath his feet. Arthur knew that sound. He had made it himself 5 days ago. Standing in the living room with the phone against his ear, watching a stranger wave at him through the window. Dad, Ethan whispered. What do I do? You come home, Arthur said. You come home, and you smile at her. And you act like nothing has changed. And then you and I are going to end this. Together. Dennis Kowalski arrived at the house at 6 in the morning, before the sky had finished turning light. He parked 2 blocks away and walked through the neighbor's backyard, crossing the fence at a point Arthur had described behind the old maple, where the slats had loosened after last winter's ice storm. Arthur met him at the back door. They had not seen each other in person for 3 weeks. Dennis looked the same as always, broad shoulders, thick hands, a face built for endurance rather than expression. But his eyes were different, sharper. The eyes of a man who had spent 40 years reading crime scenes and could see one forming in real time. Katya was still asleep upstairs. Arthur had checked at 5:45. Her door was closed. The hallway was silent. He had placed a thin strip of transparent tape across the bottom of her doorframe 2 nights ago. An old counterintelligence trick Dennis had taught him over chess. The tape was unbroken. She had not left her room. They sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, speaking in voices barely above breath. Dennis placed a folder on the table. Inside were 4 printed photographs. The first showed Stefan Volkov's square jaw, cropped dark hair, gray eyes, taken from an Interpol surveillance database. The second showed the same man entering a Zurich bank under the name Martin Kreis. The third was a blurred Frankfurt Street camera image of a woman matching Alina's description. The fourth was new, Arthur had not seen it before. It showed a man sitting at an outdoor cafe in Burlington. The timestamp read 11 days ago. The man was Stefan Volkov. "He's here," Dennis said. Arthur's hands went still on the table. Not in Zurich. Not in Vienna. Here. Burlington. He's been in the city for at least 11 days. This was taken by a traffic camera on Church Street, 3 blocks from Margaret Stone's office. Interpol flagged it overnight. Arthur stared at the photograph. 11 days. Stefan Volkov had been 3 blocks from this house, walking the same streets, breathing the same air, while Arthur had been sitting in his study, decoding messages and running tests. The predator had not been distant. He had been circling, Dennis continued. Interpol has confirmed 4 cases. Vienna, Friedrich, Voss. Munich, a retired surgeon named Hans Becker, died of an apparent stroke. Assets transferred to a woman named Katerina Dragovich. Katerina. Arthur felt the name settle against his ribs. Katerina. Katya. The diminutive form. They weren't even changing the names significantly. They were abbreviating them. The way a corporation abbreviates a brand for different markets. The 3rd case, Dennis said. Tampa, Florida. A widower named Gerald Hutchins, 71. Still alive. His daughter discovered irregularities in his accounts before the scheme reached completion. The woman involved identified herself as Natalia Petrovic. She disappeared before police could question her. The financial advisor used the name Stefan Marsh. Arthur wrote the names in his notebook. Alina, Katerina, Natalia, Nadia, Katya. 5 names. Possibly 2 women. Possibly 3. All Slavic. All ending in the vowel sound that made them feel soft and approachable and trustworthy. The linguistics of deception. And we are number 4. Arthur said. Dennis nodded. Which means we have something the others didn't. We have advance warning. Friedrich Voss didn't know until he was dead. Hans Becker's family didn't know until the money was gone. Gerald Hutchins got lucky his daughter was suspicious. But you, Arthur, you figured it out while the operation is still active. That gives us a window. How long? Dennis looked at the folder. The decoded message said the exit window closes in 6 weeks. That message was sent 3 weeks ago. So we have approximately 3 weeks, maybe less. If they sense something has changed, Arthur calculated. 3 weeks. 21 days. 504 hours. He could work with that. He had solved differential equations with less time and fewer variables. At 8:15, Arthur's phone vibrated. Margaret Stone. He stepped into the garage and answered. The freeze order is signed, Margaret said. All joint accounts between Ethan and Nadia Brennan are frozen as of 7:45 this morning. The judge reviewed the documentation overnight. He called it, and I'm quoting, the most methodically assembled fraud brief he'd seen in 30 years of family court. Your notebook impressed him. Arthur did not feel impressed. He felt the clock. Margaret continued. I've also filed the fraud injunction on the insurance policy. The beneficiary change is suspended pending forensic handwriting analysis. And I spoke with the Vermont AG's office. They're assigning an investigator. But Arthur, I have something else. I reached Margaret Voss last night after our call. She's agreed to provide a sworn deposition identifying Stefan Volkov as Martin Kreis. She will also testify that the photograph of Alina matches a woman she saw in Friedrich's company repeatedly over 14 months. This gives us cross-jurisdictional evidence linking Volkov to at least 2 confirmed cases. Arthur exhaled. The architecture of the counterattack was taking shape. Legal channels, financial locks, international testimony. But there was still a gap. A critical one. Margaret, he said. We need to tell Ethan. The line was quiet for 4 seconds. Yes, Margaret said. You do. And it needs to happen today, because once the account freeze triggers a notification, and it will, Within 24 to 48 hours, the woman in your house will know something has changed. If Ethan doesn't understand the situation before that moment, his reaction could compromise everything. Arthur hung up and returned to the kitchen. Dennis was studying the photographs, arranging them in chronological order on the table. Vienna, Munich, Tampa, Burlington. A timeline of predation laid out on Arthur's kitchen table like a hand of cards. "I have to call my son," Arthur said. Dennis looked up. He nodded once. "Do you want me to stay?" Arthur considered this. "No," he said. "This conversation belongs to a father and his son, no one else." Dennis gathered the photographs and placed them back in the folder. He left the way he had come through the backyard, over the fence, past the maple. Arthur watched him disappear into the morning light and thought of all the invisible architectures that hold a life together. Trust, routine, the assumption that the people in your house are who they say they are. He had built 64 years on those architectures, and now he was about to tear them down for his son. Brick by brick, in a single phone call. He dialed Ethan's number at 9:31. Ethan answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" Arthur sat down in Helen's chair. The cushion still held the shape of her. Even after all these years, a ghost pressed into fabric and foam. He placed his hand on the armrest, where her hand used to rest. He took one breath, then another. "Ethan," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not react. Do not raise your voice. Do not change your expression if anyone is near you. Can you do that?" A pause. "Dad, you're scaring me." "Good," Arthur said. "Because what I'm about to tell you should scare you. And then it should make you very, very precise. The woman living in our house is not Nadia. She has never been Nadia, and the people behind her are planning something much worse than stealing our money." The line went silent. Arthur could hear his son breathing short, shallow, accelerating. The sound of a man whose world was cracking beneath his feet. Arthur knew that sound. He had made it himself 5 days ago, standing in the living room with the phone against his ear, watching a stranger wave at him through the window. "Dad," Ethan whispered. "What do I do?" "You come home," Arthur said. "You come home, and you smile at her, and you act like nothing has changed, and then you and I are going to end this together." Dinner was at 7:15. Arthur set the table with 3 plates, 3 glasses, and a bottle of Pinot Noir that Helen had loved. He lit her beeswax candles left to right, the way he always did. And for a moment the kitchen smelled like every Sunday evening of the last 40 years. Routine was the camouflage. Katya had prepared roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes. Not Nadia's recipe. Nadia used thyme and lemon zest, and always overcooked the potatoes slightly, because she liked them crisp at the edges. Katya's potatoes were smooth and golden, and geometrically uniform, the work of someone following instructions rather than instinct. Entry 64. Ethan sat across from Katya, wearing a gray sweater Nadia had bought him last Christmas. Arthur had suggested it during their morning briefing. "Wear something she gave you. See if she recognizes it." Katya did not mention the sweater. Entry 65. At 7:38, Ethan set down his fork. "So I got a call today," he said. His tone was casual, almost distracted. "From King's College London. They're offering me a visiting professorship in applied mathematics. 2 years, starting in September. I'd need to respond within 3 weeks." Arthur watched Katya's hands. They did not move. Her fork remained suspended 3 inches above her plate. Her face performed surprise eyebrows, lifting, lips parting. But her hands were perfectly, unnaturally still. The stillness of calculation. 3 weeks. Arthur had chosen that number deliberately. It matched the exit window from the decoded message. If Katya relayed this to Stefan, he would face an impossible collision. his own deadline meeting an external variable that threatened to dismantle the entire operation. "Would I come with you?" Katya asked. "Of course," Ethan said. "Maybe we'd find a flat in Bloomsbury. You always talked about wanting to see the British Museum." Nadia had never mentioned the British Museum. She had talked about the Tate Modern, specifically the Rothko room, which she had read about in a magazine kept folded in her nightstand drawer. Ethan had designed this detail as a test. "I would love that," Katya said. "The British Museum. That would be a dream." Entry 66. The dinner ended at 8:20. Katya cleared the plates. Arthur excused himself to his study and opened the encrypted laptop Ruth had configured. The monitoring dashboard showed all devices on the home network and a device labeled unknown 7C that connected only between 11 at night and 1 in the morning, transmitting small encrypted packets to an IP address traced to a VPN relay in Bucharest. At 10:53, Katya said goodnight. At 11:07, unknown 7C activated. The transmission lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Then, the device went dark. Ruth called within moments. "She sent a message," she said. "Encrypted, but commercial grade. I've cracked it." She read the decoded text. E. Announced relocation to London. Timeline: 3 weeks. Requesting immediate guidance. Burlington window closing. Recommend accelerating Phase 3 to 10 days. Awaiting confirmation from S. Phase 3. The insurance. The brake inspection. The fuel line. The emergency call rerouting. Phase 3 was the part where his son was supposed to die. Arthur typed a message to Dennis. Transmission intercepted. She's requesting acceleration. Phase 3 in 10 days. Stefan must respond. Church Street watch critical. Dennis replied in 40 seconds. Already in position. If he shows, I see him. At 11:41, a second notification appeared. An incoming transmission to UNK known. 7C. Ruth called immediately. He responded, she said. Routed through Prague. But I've isolated the origin. The signal came from within Burlington city limits. Stefan isn't communicating remotely. He's here, and he just made a mistake. Ruth read the decoded response. Accelerate to 7 days. Move insurance claim trigger to day 11. Arrange vehicle incident for E on Route 7. Confirm with K. Exit package ready. Zurich account active. Destroy all local devices after completion. Vehicle incident on Route 7. Arthur's hand trembled. It was the road Ethan took to the university every morning, a winding 2-lane highway following the Winooski River through curves where the guardrails were thin and the shoulder dropped 15 feet to the water. A car with compromised brakes, taken at speed through those curves, would not survive. And the rerouted emergency call would ensure help arrived too late. 7 days. Arthur composed a group message to Dennis, Ruth, Margaret, and Ethan. 5 people standing between his son and a stretch of river road. Stefan confirmed. 7 days. Vehicle incident planned for Route 7. We have his location signal. This ends now. Margaret responded first. Filing emergency order at 8 a.m. I need 4 hours. Dennis. Eyes on Church Street. He won't move without me knowing. Ruth. Tracing the relay to pinpoint his exact address. Give me until morning. Ethan was the last to respond. 2 words. I'm ready. Arthur set the phone on the desk. Outside, the night was black and absolute, the kind of darkness that only exists in northern Vermont in autumn. Somewhere in that darkness, Stefan Volkov sat in a rented room believing he had 7 days to kill a man and disappear. He did not know that the old man had decoded his messages, intercepted his transmissions, frozen his accounts, and assembled a team closing around him like the walls of a mathematical proof inevitable, airtight, and precise. The old man sees nothing. Arthur smiled for the first time in 5 days. Ruth's call came at 6:11 in the morning. Arthur was already awake. He had not slept. The notebook lay open on the desk. Entries 64 through 68, written in handwriting that grew smaller and more precise as the night deepened, as though the words themselves were tightening around their subject. "I found him," Ruth said. No greeting. No preamble. Stefan Volkov is renting a furnished apartment on North Winooski Avenue. Unit 4B. He's been there for 13 days. The lease is under the name Marcus Kessler. He paid 3 months in advance. Cash. The landlord accepted a photocopy of a German driver's license that I'm certain is forged. Arthur wrote the address. North Winooski Avenue. Less than 2 miles from his house. Less than half a mile from the Route 7 on-ramp where his son was supposed to die. "There's more," Ruth said. "I traced the financial pathway from the Bucharest relay to a series of shell accounts. The money moves through 4 layers, Bucharest to Cyprus, Cyprus to Liechtenstein, Liechtenstein to Zurich, Zurich to a final holding account in the Cayman Islands. But one of the intermediate transfers included a processing fee paid to a local business, a car repair shop on Riverside Avenue called Green Mountain Auto. The payment was $840, dated 9 days ago." Arthur's pen stopped moving. A car repair shop. $840. 9 days ago, 3 days before someone canceled Ethan's brake inspection and suppressed the fuel line recall. Ruth continued. "The shop is registered to a man named Pavel Mirescu, age 42, Romanian passport, Vermont residency, since 2023. No criminal record in the United States. But Arthur the surname, Mirescu," Arthur said. "Elena Mirescu, the beneficiary in Friedrich Voss's forged will." Ruth was quiet for 2 seconds. "Their family," she said. "This isn't just an operation. It's a family business." Arthur closed his eyes. The architecture expanded in his mind like a blueprint unfolding. Stefan Volkov at the center, strategist, financier, handler, the women Katya, Nadia, Alina, whoever else existed in the rotation deployed as infiltrators. And now Pavel Mirescu, connected by blood, handling the mechanical component. The vehicle sabotage. The thing that was supposed to look like an accident. He called Dennis. The retired inspector answered with the sound of wind in the background, the ambient noise of a man who had been standing outside for hours. "I've been watching the cafe since 4:30, Dennis said. "No sign of Volkov yet. But I have something." At 5:52, a white van pulled up to the cafe's service entrance. A man got out, went inside for 7 minutes, then left. The van is registered to Green Mountain Auto, Riverside Avenue. The driver matches the physical description of a man named Pavel Mirescu. Arthur relayed Ruth's findings. Dennis was silent for a long moment. "So Mirescu services the vehicle," Dennis said slowly. "He compromises the brakes, delays the fuel line repair, and creates the mechanical conditions for a fatal accident. Volkov manages the insurance and financial architecture. Katya manages the household infiltration and maintains access. 3 operators, 3 functions, 1 target. It's clean, professional, and it means Mirescu has likely already accessed Ethan's car." Arthur felt something cold settle in his stomach. Ethan's Volvo was parked in the driveway. It had been there all night, but 3 days ago, Ethan had taken it to a routine oil change at a shop he'd found on a recommendation app. Arthur had not thought to ask which shop. He called Ethan. His son answered immediately. Voice low. Controlled the voice of a man who had learned in 48 hours how to live inside a lie. "Ethan, where did you get your oil changed last week?" "Green Mountain Auto," Ethan said. "On Riverside. Nadia recommended it. She said a colleague mentioned it." Arthur's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles went white. Nadia Katya had directed Ethan to the shop. She had placed his car in Pavel Mirescu's hands. The oil change was the cover. The real work happened underneath. In the spaces between routine maintenance items, where a skilled mechanic could weaken a brake line, loosen a fuel connector, and create a failure that would trigger at highway speed on a curving road along a river. "Don't drive the car," Arthur said. "Don't touch it. Don't start the engine. I'm sending someone to examine it today." Dennis made 2 calls. The first was to a forensic mechanic he had worked with during his years on the force, a woman named Irene Taggart, who specialized in vehicular tampering analysis. The second was to the Burlington Police Department, where he requested a quiet meeting with a detective he trusted, someone outside the normal channels, someone who would listen before acting. Irene Taggart arrived at the Brennan house at 11:45. She was 55, compact, with grease-stained hands that she did not apologize for. She brought a rolling tool case and a diagnostic scanner that she connected to the Volvo's OBD port before she even looked under the hood. The scan took 14 minutes. Irene emerged from beneath the car with her jaw set tight. "3 modifications," she said. "First, the brake fluid reservoir has been partially drained and the line scored with a fine blade at the junction point. Under normal driving, it holds. Under sustained braking, the kind you'd need on a downhill curve, it fails. Second, the fuel line connector has been loosened by approximately 1/8 of a turn. Not enough to leak at idle, enough to separate under vibration at speeds above 50 miles per hour. Third, the emergency call module has been reprogrammed to route through a secondary dispatcher instead of direct 911. She looked at Arthur with eyes that had seen this before. "Someone wanted this car to crash," she said. "And they wanted the driver to burn before help arrived." Arthur stood in his driveway in the pale November sunlight and felt the world narrow to a single point. His son had driven this car 2 days ago. He had taken it to the university and back, 40 minutes each way on Route 7, past the curves along the Winooski River, at speeds that would have triggered every sabotaged component. The only reason Ethan was alive was probability the brake line had not yet failed, the fuel connector had not yet separated. Mathematics had saved his son. Not safety, not protection. Chance. He would not trust chance again. At 1:15, Margaret Stone called. "The emergency asset freeze has been extended by judicial order," she said. "I've also filed a motion to preserve all records at Green Mountain Auto as potential evidence. And Arthur, the Vermont AG, has escalated this to the FBI. A field agent from the Burlington office will contact you within 24 hours. Arthur thanked her and hung up. He walked into his study and sat at the desk. The notebook now contained 71 entries. He turned to a fresh page and drew a diagram, 3 circles connected by lines. Stefan Volkov at the top, Katya Petrescu on the left, Pavel Mirescu on the right. Below them, a single name in a box, Ethan Brennan. And around the entire structure, a larger circle, drawn in red ink, labeled with 5 names. Arthur, Dennis, Ruth, Margaret, Irene. The net was complete. Every node identified. Every connection mapped. Every function understood. What remained was the closing. The moment when the circle tightened and the people inside it discovered that the old man had seen everything. Arthur capped the pen. 6 days remained. The FBI agent's name was Special Agent Diane Whitfield. She was 43, tall, with short brown hair, and a voice that carried the flat precision of someone accustomed to reading Miranda rights in parking lots and hotel hallways. She arrived at Arthur's house at 8 in the morning on day 6, accompanied by a second agent who did not introduce himself and stood near the door with his hands clasped in front of him like a man guarding a threshold. Katya had left 30 minutes earlier. Arthur had watched her drive away in the rental car she had been using, a silver Honda, registered under Nadia's name, saying she was meeting a friend for coffee. Dennis was following her at a 3-block distance, his own car unremarkable, his experience invisible. Agent Whitfield sat in Arthur's study and reviewed the evidence for 97 minutes. She did not rush. She did not interrupt. She read Ruth's financial audit, line by line. She examined the decoded Caesar cipher messages. She studied the intercepted transmissions, the Bucharest and Prague relay paths, the shell account architecture from Cyprus to Liechtenstein to Zurich to the Caymans. She reviewed Irene Taggart's forensic vehicle report, the scored brake line, the loosened fuel connector, the rerouted emergency module. She read Margaret Stone's legal filings. She examined Dennis's Interpol correspondence and the surveillance photographs of Stefan Volkov on Church Street. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at Arthur. "Professor Brennan," she said, "in 21 years with the Bureau, I have seen 3 cases with this level of documentation assembled by a civilian. All 3 resulted in federal convictions." She paused. "You should have been an investigator." "I am an investigator," Arthur said. "I just investigate numbers instead of people." Whitfield almost smiled. "Here is what happens next. I am requesting an emergency federal warrant for the arrest of Stefan Volkov, also known as Marcus Kessler, Sergei Volkov, Martin Kreis, and Stefan Marsh. Charges will include wire fraud, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and attempted murder. Separately, I am requesting arrest warrants for Katya Petrescu, also known as Katerina Dragovich, on charges of identity theft, conspiracy, and accessory to attempted murder, and for Pavel Mirescu, on charges of vehicular tampering with intent to cause bodily harm or death." She stood. "The arrests will happen simultaneously. If we take one and the others learn of it, they run. We have one window. I need your cooperation to keep that window open." Arthur nodded. "What do you need?" "Normalcy," Whitfield said. "One more day of normalcy. Tonight, behave as you have been behaving. Let the woman return. Let her cook dinner. Let her say good night. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., 3 teams will execute simultaneously. Team 1 takes Volkov at North Winooski Avenue. Team 2 takes Marescu at Green Mountain Auto. Team 3 takes the woman here, in this house." Arthur looked at the agent standing by the door. The man had not moved in 97 minutes. "Will my son be safe?" Arthur asked. Whitfield held his gaze. "Your son will not leave this house until all 3 subjects are in custody. That is my guarantee." She left at 10:15. Arthur sat alone in the study, listening to the house breathe around him. One more day. 22 hours. He had lived with Katya for 26 days. He could endure 22 more hours. Katya returned at noon. She carried a paper bag from a bakery and placed 2 croissants on the kitchen counter with the careful presentation of someone performing domesticity. Arthur thanked her. He ate one. It was flaky and buttered and tasted like nothing because his mouth had forgotten how to register anything except the metallic flavor of waiting. The afternoon passed in fragments. Arthur graded papers he had already graded. Katya read on the couch. Ethan came home at 4 and kissed Katya on the forehead with a tenderness that Arthur knew was costing his son everything he had. The 3 of them sat together in the living room watching a documentary about ocean currents. Nobody watched the screen. Everyone watched each other, without appearing to. Dinner was pasta. Katya made carbonara, heavy on the cream, light on the pepper. Nadia's carbonara was traditional Roman, no cream, egg yolks only. With guanciale she ordered from an Italian grocer in New York. Arthur did not record this discrepancy. The notebook was closed. The evidence was complete. There was nothing left to document. At 9:30, Katya said goodnight. She paused at the foot of the stairs and turned back. "Dad," she said, "thank you for being so kind to me. I know it hasn't been easy since Helen passed, but I want you to know this family means everything to me." Arthur looked at her face. It was perfect. The expression, the softness in the eyes, the slight tremor in the voice, every element calibrated to produce warmth and sincerity and gratitude. He had spent 26 days studying this face. He knew its architecture, the way he knew the structure of a prime number beautiful on the surface, governed by hidden rules beneath. "Good night, sweetheart," he said. She went upstairs. Arthur listened to her footsteps on the old wooden stairs, each creak a countdown. He heard her door close. He heard the house settle into its nighttime register. The low hum of the furnace. The occasional tick of cooling pipes. He did not sleep. Ethan did not sleep. They sat together in the study with the lights off, father and son, side by side in the darkness, saying nothing because everything had already been said. At 4:30, Arthur made coffee. At 5:15, he heard the first car park on the street outside. Then a second, then a third. At 5:58, his phone vibrated. Whitfield. All teams in position. 2 minutes. Arthur stood. Ethan stood beside him. Through the window. The street was gray, with pre-dawn light. 3 black SUVs sat at intervals along the block. Engines off. Their presence as quiet and deliberate as a held breath. At 6:01, the front door opened. Whitfield entered first, badge raised, followed by 4 agents in tactical vests. Their movements were synchronized, each step placed with the economy of people who had rehearsed this entry dozens of times. FBI, Whitfield said. Her voice filled the house like a bell struck once. Federal warrant for the arrest of Katya Petrescu. Footsteps upstairs, a door opening. A pause, the specific silence of a person calculating options and finding none. Katya appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a white nightgown. Her hair was loose. Her face was calm, composed, still performing, even now. She looked down at the agents, then at Arthur, then at Ethan. Ethan, she said. Her voice trembled. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them who I am. I'm your wife. I'm Nadia. Please. Ethan looked at her. Arthur watched his son's face in the gray morning light. The jaw tight, the eyes steady. The grief and rage compressed into something quiet and immovable. Ethan had his mother's courage. Arthur had always known this, but he had never seen it until now. No, Ethan said. You're not. Katya's face changed. The mask didn't crack. It dissolved. The softness left her eyes like water draining from a glass. What remained was angular and cold and precise, the face of a professional assessing a failed operation. Whitfield's phone buzzed as the agents placed Katya in handcuffs. She glanced at the screen. Volkov is in custody, she said. Mirescu is in custody. All 3 secured. Arthur leaned against the wall. His legs were shaking. 26 days. 71 notebook entries. 4 tests. 6 decoded messages. 3 sabotaged components. 2 confirmed deaths in other countries. 1 son. Still alive. Standing in the hallway of their home. It's over. Ethan whispered. Arthur shook his head. Not yet, he said. Not until they can never do this to anyone else. The federal courthouse in Burlington stood on Elmwood Avenue, a stone building with columns that Arthur had passed 1,000 times without ever entering. Now he climbed the steps on a Tuesday morning in December, with Ethan beside him and Margaret Stone 3 paces ahead. Her heels striking the marble with the rhythm of a metronome. The courtroom was smaller than Arthur had expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, an American flag standing in the corner like a witness that never blinks. The gallery held 47 seats. 31 were occupied. Dennis Kowalski sat in the second row. Ruth Calloway sat behind him with encrypted copies of every intercepted transmission. Irene Taggart was in the 4th row, her forensic vehicle report bound in a blue folder. And in the front row sat Margrethe Voss, who had flown from Vienna the previous evening. She wore a black dress. Her hands were folded. She did not look at the defense table. Beside her sat Gerald Hutchins. 71. Tampa. The widower whose daughter had discovered the irregularities before the scheme reached completion. His shoulders curved inward, like a man who had been made smaller by what had happened to him. The defendants entered at 9:15. Stefan Volkov came first, gray suit, composed face, eyes scanning the gallery once, with mechanical efficiency, before sitting and never looking again. Pavel Mirescu entered second. Thick-armed, eyes on the floor, radiating the resignation of someone who had known this room was inevitable. Katya entered last. She looked at Ethan once. 2 seconds. A final flicker of the woman she had pretended to be. Then it was gone. She sat and folded her hands. Assistant United States Attorney Claire Novak opened with numbers. The defendants operated a coordinated fraud and murder-for-profit scheme across 4 countries over approximately 4 years, she said. Total documented financial loss exceeds $3.2 million. 2 victims are confirmed dead. A third survived due to the intervention of his father, Professor Arthur Brennan, who identified the scheme and assembled the evidentiary record that forms the foundation of this prosecution. Novak called Marguerite Voss first. Marguerite rose slowly, arthritic hands gripping the armrest, and walked to the witness box with the deliberate pace of a woman who had crossed an ocean for this moment. She spoke for 43 minutes. She described Friedrich, his morning walks along the Danube Canal, his rebuilt tractor engine, his inability to be alone. She described Alina, the grief group, the 14 months of patience, the evening phone calls, the gradual replacement of a wife's presence with a stranger's. She described Martin Kreis, the financial restructuring, the new will, the signatures Friedrich gave, because trust had been manufactured so carefully that suspicion never formed. And she described coming home from the hospital to an empty house, a dead husband, and a life hollowed out from the inside. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Not procedural silence. The silence of people confronting something they had believed only happened in stories. Gerald Hutchins testified next. His voice was thinner, wrapped in the particular shame of a man who believed he should have known better. He described Natalia, how she had appeared at a community center, remembered his wife's name without being told, brought homemade soup on the anniversary of his wife's death. He described the slow bleeding of $240,000 over 9 months. "I thought she loved me," Gerald said. "I thought someone had finally seen me again." He looked at his hands. "I was wrong about what I was being seen for." Arthur closed his eyes. He understood Gerald with a precision that hurt. The loneliness of aging. The hunger to be recognized as still present, still worthy. Helen's death had opened that same door. The difference was not intelligence. The difference was that Ethan had called from JFK at the exact right moment. Ruth testified about the digital architecture, encrypted transmissions, relay paths, shell accounts, intercepted messages. Irene Taggart described the 3 modifications to Ethan's Volvo using diagrams and photographs. A scored brake line that would fail within 4 to 7 seconds under sustained braking. A fuel connector loosened by 1/8 of a turn, enough to spray gasoline onto the exhaust manifold at highway speed. A rerouted emergency module, adding 11 minutes to response time. On a road along the Winooski River, in a burning car, 11 minutes was the difference between rescue and recovery. The defense offered what they could. Volkov's lawyer argued jurisdictional complexity. Mirescu's lawyer claimed coercion. Katya's public defender argued she was a trafficking victim manipulated by Volkov into a criminal enterprise she could not escape. Arthur watched Katya's face during this argument. She did not look like a victim. Her eyes moved once to the jury box, measuring, calculating. Arthur recognized the look. He had seen it at the dinner table when Ethan mentioned London. The stillness of recalibration. Not fear. Strategy. The trial lasted 4 days. On the 5th morning, the jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned guilty. All counts. All 3 defendants. Stefan Volkov did not react. His face maintained the composure of a man who had built his life on the assumption that consequences were for other people and was only now discovering he had been wrong. Pavel Mirescu lowered his head. His thick hands gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. Katya stood motionless as the marshal approached. She looked once more at Ethan, not performing this time, not calculating. For a single moment, something authentic crossed her face. not remorse. Recognition, the acknowledgement that the man she had studied and mimicked and planned to destroy had been, in the end, part of a family she had underestimated. Margaret the Voss did not cry. She sat in her seat and looked at the flag in the corner of the courtroom and nodded once. Slowly, as though confirming something she had already known. Arthur reached for Ethan's hand. His son gripped it hard. Neither spoke. There are moments when language fails. When the only adequate response is the pressure of one hand inside another. The silent acknowledgement that something has ended and something else uncertain, fragile, not yet named has begun. The sentencing hearing was held on a Thursday in January. Snow had fallen overnight, 4 inches of clean white covering the courthouse steps like a fresh page. Arthur climbed them slowly. His knees ached in cold weather now, a development he had noticed only in the last year, as though his body had decided that 64 years of reliable service was sufficient and had begun submitting its resignation one joint at a time. Ethan walked beside him. He had cut his hair shorter since the trial. He looked older, not aged, clarified. The softness that had lived in his face during the years of his marriage had been replaced by something leaner, a quality Arthur recognized from his own mirror in the months after Helen's death. The face of a man who had been edited by loss. The courtroom was fuller this time. 53 people filled the gallery and lined the walls. Arthur recognized some of them. Dennis, Ruth, Irene, Margarethe, Gerald, and his daughter. But there were others. Faces he had never seen. People who had read about the case in the news, or who had received calls from the FBI's victim outreach coordinator, or who had simply driven to Burlington because they needed to see the ending of a story that had intersected with their own. Agent Whitfield had told Arthur the previous week that the investigation had expanded. The FBI task force, working with Interpol and prosecutors in Austria and Germany, had identified 214 potential victims across 7 countries. 214. Arthur had written the number in his notebook entry 79 and stared at it for a long time. Each digit represented dozens of lives, marriages hollowed out, savings erased. Trust the invisible architecture that holds human beings together demolished and sold for parts. Judge Eleanor Marsh presided. She was 61, silver-haired, with a voice that carried the particular authority of someone who had spent decades listening to the worst of human behavior and had not yet lost the capacity to be appalled by it. "Before I deliver the sentences," she said, "I will hear victim impact statements." Margaret the Voss stood first. She walked to the podium without notes. She spoke for 4 minutes. She did not describe the money or the legal battles or the forged will. She described one thing. The morning she returned from the hospital and found Friedrich's reading glasses on the kitchen table, folded the way he always folded them, arms crossed, lenses facing down, and realized that no one would ever fold them that way again. That the smallest gestures of a shared life are the ones that break you, because they are the ones no thief can replicate and no court can restore. She returned to her seat. Gerald Hutchins rose next. He was briefer. He said that before Natalia, he had been learning to live alone, that he had been building something small and honest from the ruins of his wife's death, that Natalia had not just stolen his money, she had stolen his willingness to trust another human being. And at 71, he was not certain he had enough years left to rebuild it. A woman Arthur did not recognize spoke third. Her name was Catherine Park, 58, Portland, Oregon. She described how a woman named Elena had befriended her elderly father after her mother's death, how her father had transferred $112,000 before Catherine discovered the discrepancy, how her father had died 3 months later, not from sabotage, not from poison, but from shame. He stopped eating, Catherine said. He stopped leaving the house. He stopped answering the phone. The doctor called it failure to thrive. I call it a broken heart. The courtroom absorbed these testimonies the way stone absorbs rain slowly, deeply, leaving marks that would not fade. Judge Marsh turned to the defendants. Stefan Volkov. Please rise. Volkov stood. His face was unchanged. The composure he had worn throughout the trial remained intact, a mask so thoroughly integrated that Arthur wondered whether there was anything beneath it at all. Judge Marsh spoke without consulting her notes. "Mr. Volkov, you have been convicted on 14 federal counts, including wire fraud, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, money laundering, and 2 counts of attempted murder. The evidence presented at trial demonstrates that you designed, directed, and profited from a criminal enterprise that operated across international borders for a minimum of 4 years, targeting vulnerable individuals, predominantly elderly widowers, through systematic psychological manipulation and financial exploitation. 2 of your victims are dead. Others have suffered losses that no restitution can fully repair." She paused. "I sentence you to 32 years in federal prison, to be served without the possibility of parole for the first 20 years. I further order restitution in the amount of $3.2 million to be distributed among identified victims." Volkov did not blink. He sat down with the mechanical precision of a man lowering himself into a chair he had measured in advance. "Pavel Mirescu, please rise." Mirescu stood. His hands shook. "Mr. Mirescu, you have been convicted on 6 counts, including vehicular tampering with intent to cause death, conspiracy, and accessory to attempted murder. Your technical expertise was the instrument through which this conspiracy's most violent intentions were realized. You modified a vehicle with the specific purpose of causing a fatal accident. I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison and order restitution of $420,000. Mirescu sat down heavily. His eyes were wet. Arthur watched him and felt nothing he could name. Not satisfaction, not pity, something colder. The recognition that a man with skilled hands had chosen to use them for destruction, and that choice had consumed his life as thoroughly as it had threatened Ethan's. "Katya Petrescu, please rise." Katya stood. She was thinner than she had been at the trial. The navy dress hung loosely on her frame. Her face was composed but empty. A window with the curtain drawn. "Miss Petrescu, you have been convicted on 9 counts, including identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to attempted murder. You assumed another woman's identity, infiltrated a family, and maintained that deception for 26 days while your co-conspirators prepared the conditions for a man's death. Your defense argued that you were coerced. The evidence does not support that claim. I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison and order restitution of $1.1 million. Katya sat. She did not look at Ethan. She did not look at Arthur. She looked at the table in front of her. The way a student looks at a failed examination, not with despair, but with the cold understanding that the answers she had given were wrong and there would be no opportunity to retake the test. Judge Marsh addressed the courtroom one final time. This case represents one of the most methodical and predatory fraud operations this court has encountered. It exploited grief, manipulated trust, and weaponized the most basic human need, the need to not be alone. The sentences imposed today reflect not only the severity of the crimes, but the breadth of their impact across borders and lives. She paused. Court is adjourned. Arthur sat in the emptying courtroom for several minutes after the defendants were led away. Ethan sat beside him. Margarethe Voss approached them slowly. She extended her hand to Arthur. He took it. "Thank you, Professor Brennan," she said. "You stopped the tea." Arthur held her hand. Her grip was fragile and fierce. "I had help," he said. Marguerite looked at Ethan. Then she looked back at Arthur. "Your wife must have been remarkable," she said, "to have built a family that could do this." Arthur could not speak for a moment. When he found his voice, it was barely above a whisper. "She was," he said. "She was." Spring arrived the way it always does in Vermont, reluctantly, with false starts and reversals, the ground thawing and refreezing as though the earth itself couldn't decide whether it was ready to begin again. Arthur stood at the kitchen window on a Saturday morning in April and watched the backyard come back to life. The maple had budded. A robin sat on the fence post where Helen had once hung a ceramic birdhouse that the wind knocked down 3 winters ago. He had never replaced it. Some absences become permanent, not because they must, but because replacing them would mean admitting they are gone. The house was quieter now. Katya's absence had left a silence, different from Helen's, not the warm, aching silence of someone deeply missed, but the cold, clinical silence of a lie that had been removed. Arthur had repainted the guest room. He had replaced the couch cushions. Small acts of erasure performed the way a mathematician checks a proof for errors, even when the conclusion is already certain. Ethan had moved back in after the trial. Not permanently, he kept his apartment near the university, but 3 or 4 nights a week. He slept in his old room, the one with the glow-in-the-dark stars Helen had pressed onto the ceiling. When he was 7, Arthur had offered to remove them. Ethan had said no. Some things should stay. Not everything from the past needs to be corrected. They had developed a routine. Coffee at 6:30. Arthur made it in the old Turkish sezve, Helen's sezve, the copper one with the wooden handle that Nadia had used and Katya had not. Ethan would sit at the kitchen table grading papers, and Arthur would sit across from him with the newspaper, and they would share the silence the way 2 people share a blanket, each holding their end, warmed by the knowledge that the other is there. In March, the FBI had contacted Arthur about Nadia. The real Nadia. She had been located in Zurich, living in a women's shelter under a restricted visa. The story emerged in pieces over several weeks. Nadia had been approached by Stefan Volkov 2 years before Burlington. He had offered her translation work she believed was legitimate. When she discovered the truth, she tried to leave. Volkov confiscated her passport. He threatened her family in Kyiv. He held her in a Zurich apartment for 11 months, while Katya, her younger sister, was trained and deployed in her place. Nadia had not been a conspirator. She had been a prisoner. Ethan flew to Zurich in late March. He spent 4 days with her. Arthur did not ask what they discussed. Some conversations are sealed rooms, and a father learns that his son's interior life is not a proof to be examined, but a territory to be respected. Ethan returned looking neither healed nor broken. He looked like a man who had been given a complicated truth and was still deciding where to put it. "She's not coming back," Ethan said. "Not because she doesn't care. Because she can't live in this house. Not after what happened in it." Arthur understood. The house had been a crime scene long before the FBI arrived. Every room held a performance. Every doorway framed a deception. For Nadia, returning would mean inhabiting the spaces where her sister had worn her face and planned her husband's death. Some places cannot be reclaimed. In April, Arthur returned to teaching. His first lecture back was on proof theory. He stood at the blackboard in a room of 26 graduate students and wrote a single sentence in white chalk. "A proof is not the discovery of truth. It is the demonstration that truth was there all along. This semester," he said, "we will study the architecture of certainty, how we build arguments that cannot be dismantled, how we distinguish between what we believe and what we can demonstrate." He looked at the faces before him, young, attentive, unaware that their professor was not speaking entirely about mathematics. "One day, someone will present you with something that looks true, that feels true, that performs truth so convincingly that doubt seems irrational. And in that moment, the only thing that will protect you is the habit of requiring proof." He turned back to the blackboard and began. In the evenings, Arthur still sat in his study. The notebook remained on the desk, closed, its 79 entries complete. What remained was not a mathematical problem but a human one. The slow work of rebuilding a life that had been disassembled by people who understood its architecture well enough to take it apart. He thought about Helen differently now. Before Katya, he had remembered her with passive tenderness, her face appearing at quiet moments, her voice surfacing between thoughts. Now he remembered her with active gratitude. Helen had built this family. She had given Ethan his courage and Arthur his patience. She had taught them both that love is not a feeling, but a practice. a daily decision to pay attention, to show up, to fold the reading glasses the same way every time, because consistency is its own form of devotion. On a warm evening in late April, Ethan came home with a woman Arthur had not met. Her name was Olivia. She was a colleague from the English department, tall, dark-haired, with a laugh that filled the kitchen the way Helen's laugh used to. Arthur did not compare them. He simply noticed that his son was smiling, and that the smile was unguarded, and that the house sounded like a place where people lived, rather than a place where people survived. Arthur made coffee in the Sesve. 3 cups. He carried them to the living room, where Ethan and Olivia sat on the new couch talking about a novel Arthur had not read. He set the cups down and sat in his chair, not Helen's chair, his own, and listened without joining. Content to be present, content to be the old man in the corner, who sees everything, and says nothing, and loves without condition, and without end. Outside, the last light of April settled over Burlington like a benediction. The mountains were green, the lake was still, and in a house on a quiet street, a father poured coffee for his son and thought, not for the first time, that the most elegant proof he had ever constructed was not written in chalk on a blackboard or ink in a notebook. It was sitting across from him, alive and whole, reaching for a cup.